Hello, it's Mark here at the Guitar Heresy channel, and today we're going to be looking at this, which is the second bass that I built. This was another big project, another big step forwards in terms of learning and trying new things, and actually there's quite a lot here to look at, so I'm afraid this might be a lengthy video. Time to get yourself a nice cup of tea and settle in. I will try and put chapters on this one, by the way, so that hopefully that helps if there's a particular aspect of this that you're interested in. So, the guitar. This is my first short scale bass that I built. This is a 30-inch scale. It's built with, as you can see, this wood and resin top to it. It's got active EMG humbuckers in, Warwick bridge, Geiger tuners, homemade knobs and that sort of stuff. Roasted flame maple neck on here. Yeah, really happy with how this came out. It's seen huge amounts of use since I finished it, which has got to be about 6 months ago. So it's been played most days since then, actually. Now, the main inspiration for this actually was having seen, well, river tables that I really liked, and then seeing that technique kind of transferred over to people using that on guitars. Expensive ones, which is partly why I thought, okay, if I built that first one, and that's something that looks absolutely beautiful and that I'd love to own, let's see if I can build myself something in that style. So I was looking here for something that I then could, put a top onto. I was thinking in terms of around 10mm-ish top. I wanted to keep it not too thick, so I was thinking kind of 30-35mm to start off with body, and I was expecting at that point to start building that in the way that I have my later more recent basses, actually putting a body blank together and working from there. But while I was looking for that, I actually came across a body that actually was a really good starting point. I'll put the photo up right here. This is the body as I initially received it. So this is a kind of a body in the style of a Burns Sonic guitar. They made those from 1960 to 1964. Now, it was notable at the time that it was a guitar rather than a bass, and that it was short scale as well. It was just under 24-inch scale, and that it was, for the time, a really quite relatively thin and light bodied guitar. So actually this was, I think it was like about 32mm. It was kind of ideal really in terms of thickness. And given that at this point I didn't have like a router table or a bandsaw or anything like that, I was going to have to cut out using a jigsaw by hand. Actually, the not needing to worry about just that initial profile of the guitar looked really helpful. This is a sapele type of mahogany. As you can see there, it was routed for pickups. Now, the Burns Sonic series, let me just switch to a photo of one of the actual guitars from the period. Actually use quite unusual pickups. These are a bit larger, both width and height than something like a standard Stratocaster coil. They're probably best known for these being the type of pickups that Brian May used in the guitar that he made when he was, I think he was a teenager when he made his Red Special guitar. Along with his father, but there was, that's probably what they're best known for, because they're a relatively minor form of pickup. So we've got the pickups routed on there, but nothing else. So, kind of control, cavity, neck, etc., all of that being ready to go. And I was thinking that if I'm building this actually in that kind of resin and wood style, then actually filling those pickups becomes, those pickup kind of routes, it becomes relatively easy to do. So I wasn't put off by that. So that's where we started. I then shifted to actually finding the right wood to go with that. On this photo, you'll see that there's actually two slightly different colours here. Actually, these were all cut from the same tree. The three that are slightly darker actually were oiled before they were kind of, put on sale, etc. These ones that are slightly lighter weren't, which was actually easier for what I wanted to do, because obviously the ones that were oiled, I had to then sand before actually looking to glue them or do any of that. But this was, I was searching around a number of places. I found these on Etsy, I think, in the end. And actually, we've got some real kind of gnarled kind of, they called it hedge maple, and I kind of thought that was quite a good description for it. You know, that sort of thing that's been cut numerous times and like had boughs falling off and really quite gnarled. So that looked like a really good starting point. You then have to start thinking about how you're going to put that together with the body. This is a fairly early photo of me just laying it over and trying to think about how that'll work. Now, obviously, fairly early on in that process, I realised I was going to have to overhang the body in places. Trying to keep it all within that actually wouldn't have worked at all. It works much better actually when you use that. And kind of mucked around with a few ideas on that one, but that pretty much is how that one stayed and worked out. I had a neck that I bought for it. Interestingly, that's not the neck that's on it, because I think this roasted maple looks much better with that body, but I hadn't really thought about that and the colour depth that you'd get once you had this, done and oiled and those sorts of things. So actually I started off with that neck being planned. I still got it here. I've got a project that I'm thinking about using this for at the moment, actually. It's a fake fender one. It's again 30-inch scale. It's got your standard fender profile for the heel of this, as does the neck I ended up using, going to a 38mm nut, again, as is the case with the one that I actually used. So really, I think this is a better made neck, and its looks go much better with this project, but it's actually almost identical in terms of profile to the one that I was originally thinking of using. So you've got the body, you've got the, kind of the wood to go with it. The next thing you need to do is put them together. This was done at a point before I had the sort of number of clamps that I've got now. So because I wanted to do it kind of all in one go so that I could make sure everything fitted together how I wanted it to, I kind of had to glue and then stack heavy stuff on top of it. So I had to get a bit imaginative there. Looking at this photo, there's the Type Bond, which I have to say is, I think it's fantastic glue. I've used that for numerous projects since, and it's the wood-to-wood glue that I just use. Yeah, a whole range of things. Yes, if you see at the bottom there, there's like weights from sort of free weights that I use, and all sorts of stuff there, really. Just weighing that down so that I could actually get that all to stick nicely, and it did. It glued on really, really well. That does, however, leave you with this kind of quite messy looking overlapping profile. If I look at that from the other side of the body, you can see where all of that kind of protrudes round. But I've got to say, it's then really quite easy to just kind of route around that and actually just shape that to the body. So here's the body after I'd done that routing. Very, very simple. To actually shape that. So we've now got that body which is, again, square edge, but it is all actually kind of even. And that's how I wanted it for actually preparing the top. As far as kind of getting on to pouring that resin, then the next thing that I did was to tape up kind of the edges of it. Now, nowadays, I know that you can get specific tape that's quite good for that. This is a specifically heat-resistant tape, which I picked up. I've yet to use this, actually, but they reckon that works better. Actually, I just used wide packing tape, and I just used lots of it to kind of reinforce that border. I always knew that I wanted to bevel the edges, so if that, as far as the resin went, was slightly wavy, I wasn't worried about that. And unlike if I was pouring the whole of a top of a guitar in resin, it actually had lots of these chunks of wood to anchor to, and relatively small areas where the resin was going to come right up to the edge. Yeah, so I figured I had a decent chance of that working, and actually it worked fine, you know. Here it is after I first poured the resin. This is literally just as I poured it, so we've still got sticky tape all the way around the outside. Oh, I notice here as well, I'd left the neck without any of the interesting wood, because obviously there would have been a waste because I was going to be routing that out. I did glue in a few just small blocks of just kind of cheap wood, really to just cut down on the amount of resin I was using, because good quality resin can be quite expensive. I did a fair bit of research on resin and different types that people could use, and this was one that got consistently good reviews. Glass cast resin. Now, I'm not saying it's the best resin out there, because I haven't used all of the premium ones, you know, because this I used throughout the whole of the project. Actually, I used most of the first kind of set of resin that I got, but I picked this up for another project that I'm doing, because it was really, really high quality, you know, in terms of what it produced. You know, I'm just really happy with the finish of this. So I'm not saying this is necessarily better than others, but I've had really good results with this stuff. You know, again, resin, hardener, and actually you mix it up and then pour it. The colour in here is a mica powder, which is a type of ceramic which has got quite a pearlescent finish to it. If you look at that picture and the swirls within it, actually it's quite interesting to see that naturally, as this wasn't stirred or anything by me, that's something that I would do with more recent projects, but actually just with the natural movement of the resin as it's curing and producing heat, which it does when it cures, which incidentally is why there is a limit to how deep you can go, and I went for quite a deep one because I had those little pockets with the original routing kind of pickups to kind of fill right in. As long as you're kind of doing that, actually you get some movement, and it actually really swirls that the particles, the fine particles which are kept within the resin, and I think that finish is just beautiful. It's why I've really liked resin. I've used resin in a few different craft projects since, and will use again in future. After I poured the resin, I left it the full, I gave it 2 days to cure. Generally speaking, that sort of deep pour resin sets relatively slowly. By 24 hours in, it's got enough of a surface that you don't need to worry about dust or those sorts of things or particles sticking to it, but it's not really going to be properly solid until a couple of days after, and obviously it continues curing and several weeks before it reaches its full strength. As you can see in this picture, the worktop I left this on to cure must have been at a very slight angle, because you can see here that actually the resin was thinner in some places, well, at one end of the guitar than it was at the other. I mean, I always wanted to go deep enough that it actually covered the surface so I could sand down to a very even level, but fairly obviously this meant that actually when I started sanding, there was one end of that which is going to need to go a bit deeper. And I've got to say, sanding was a bit of a nightmare. It's worth remembering that at this point, as I am now, I was very limited on the energy I had available, and at that point I wasn't as good at using that either, or kind of managing that. So it took me, I think, a couple of weeks to do the whole of the sanding because I could only do a bit of it at a time. Resin is very strong and tough, and actually even with like 40 grit sandpaper and you know, kind of powered sander like that, it took ages for me to go through that. Eventually though, I'd got that kind of fully sanded down. While I was going through that process as well, it gave me that chance to look at how I wanted to arrange things. If you look at this picture here, you've got the, if you look at the bottom left hand corner of that guitar, you can see I still hadn't finished sanding through at that point, but I just cleaned it up and was starting to lay things out and actually think about how things went. By this point, having worked with that hedge maple for a while and just loving how good that looked, I'd already switched to actually finding a roasted flame maple neck, which I thought would go with it much better, which is this neck that I kind of ended up using. And as you can see at this point, that's not going into routed pockets. This is just me laying stuff out to look at how it would go. I was thinking that these pickups with exposed copper wiring actually might look really good on this project. In the end, I didn't use those. But actually, the idea of that exposed copper with quite a natural look is something that still appeals. And actually, I've got that plans for those two pickups in a black limber body that I'm thinking of putting together. That actually I think would look lovely. You know, it would come up really well against the wood of that. At that point, though, I was thinking about making it as a passive base. I had a slightly different bridge that I was initially planning on using, which you've got there. Still a two-piece one though, and that was me just kind of laying it out and getting a sense for actually that design and where I would go with that. Okay, so from there we actually kind of move forwards to finally finishing kind of doing that sanding, and beveling the edge. Now what we've got here is just the initial bevel. I did go back and redo this later actually because I wanted a slightly different look, but this is with just a simple curved edge bevel done to the front and back of the body at this point. As you can see, this is before I'd cut or routed any pockets within it. All I had here was I just cleaned it up, I'd routed that bit, I'd sanded it to reasonably high grit, and I just used some, I think it was like kind of linseed oil or something like that, just to get a sense of how it would look, and was just loving how that looked. You've got the, you know, that blue mica in the resin kind of there. I'm really, really happy with that. And I've got to say, still beautiful to this day. I think thus far this is the prettiest guitar I've produced, and I've really enjoyed playing it as well. But we'll talk about the playability of that more in a little while. The next thing I needed to do was actually shift to routing the pockets in it. Before I did that, I kind of, as I say, finishing the sanding took quite a while. It gave me more time to think about things. During that time, one of the things that came up was that in another bass that I'd had a go at putting active pickups in because I was really interested to see how they sounded and really liked the sound. So while I was looking around, actually I found these. What we've got here is a pair of EMG pickups, which are humbuckers. They're their standard bass size, but these aren't actually bass humbuckers. These are EMG 707s, which is a pickup which is designed for 7-string guitars. The voicing on these works really well on bass though. One of the things that I was really interested when I've been researching different pickups was that people often talked about, you know, a whole range of things, but resonant peak wise, these were down actually with bass guitars really. They're designed for a 7-string guitar with a low B on it, and that people often detune further than that. And actually, it sounded like I'd get a really interesting sound there. And I really did, you know. I picked up these two and I would not swap them out for anything. They're kind of, when I do sound, you know, kind of demonstration of this, it's got a growl to it, which is just beautiful, particularly in the bridge position. I might, in future guitars, if I'm doing this sort of setup, use something like an EMG 35 in the neck. And I have to say they've got lots of different variations there on what actually the sounding of that is. So it's not like you're kind of spoilt for choice. But in the bridge, I think actually putting the 707 works really nicely if some or all of the time you want something that's got a bit more grit, a bit more grind to it. Really, really lovely. Yeah, very happy with that. So, having laid that out and sort of looked at how I wanted that, I then got on with kind of routing the pockets for that. This is probably the first picture after I'd routed them. Now, interestingly, I learned quite a lot in doing that. I routed these pickup holes before I routed the neck pocket, and I did it wrong. One of the big things I learned from that was that routers work so much better if you're using them to nibble the edge of wood than if you try ploughing right through it. if you've got any background in using routers, you already know this. It's bloody obvious, but I had never done this before, and actually I really needed to learn. I'd kind of drilled in, so I had something for the router bit to go into, but then as it was going around, it so easily bounced around the place and caused damage. Now, if you look at there, this front pocket, there was a bit here and a bit on this side, and then a bit here on this one. I immediately thought, actually, I'm going to have to use some sort of surround for those. But to be honest, after I'd patched that up using some wood filler and what have you, I'd have been fine without. Certainly by the time I was doing the neck pocket, I'd learnt my lesson a little bit. Worth saying, with all of these, I was buying in the kind of templates. I think I've commented before that actually having a laser cutter is genius for actually being able to cut your own templates. Now this, I kind of wasn't perfect actually looking at this. I kind of obviously it jumped around a little bit, but I'd certainly learnt more than when I did these. This is a standard short scale Fender bass neck pocket type template. And worked perfectly for what I was looking for there. And by that point I'd learned that yes, you need to drill this out a bit with a Forstner bit first. If you're not familiar with what a Forstner bit is, it's a bit that produces a predominantly blunt-ended hole. Yeah, so rather than a drill where you're drilling through something where you've got quite a distinct leading point of that, these can be quite wide. I mean, this is quite a large one. This is 45mm, I think. Yeah, kind of 45 millimeters. If I'm drilling out a pocket like this, I'll often use maybe a 10mm or 12mm for the corners, and then something like a 20-25mm, you know, kind of to drill out most of the meat of what's getting rid of there. But they cause a hole that's almost flat at the bottom. As you can see, that center spike, because that's a locating point, is a little bit deeper. Yeah, and actually that does project a little bit lower. So if you want a truly smooth bottomed you know, kind of area that you've routed, the last route you do need to do the last few millimeters kind of without sort of just drilling it with a Forstner bit. But anyway, there was a lot of learning in there. This gives you some idea of how I was actually doing that. I was still using at this point a hand drill in a kind of cheap press that you just bolt it into. This is actually a couple of days after that, when I was doing the control cavity. And by this point I'd very much learned, you know, to really take my time with getting as much out as I can using the Forstner bit and actually kind of, you know, clearing that. If I shift to the next photo, you'll see there actually, you know, kind of I'd kind of drawn on the outline of the template that I was using, but then you know, kind of drilled that back, then fixed the bit on there. Actually, again, I've still got the templates there. That's your routing template for actually the cover. That's your routing template for the cavity, and that's the outline that you can see there. And then you need to be able to route down just the lip of it so that the this will actually fit nicely and neatly into the top part of that cavity, sitting on these, you know, this ledge that you form there. So with this on, with it thoroughly done with a router bit, actually we got a really nice result, yeah, with routing. The only thing that I would mention, and I don't think you can see it clearly on there, let's see if we can do that on this. Yeah. If you look here, the one thing I did find with Sapele particularly is tear out, that it could like rip bits. And again, this, even having done that really thoroughly, had that little bit of tear out on the top of this one. So I then went back and with a straight edge and just routed that kind of flat to the edge of that control cavity, and it's held in 3 places rather than 4. Seems to work beautifully though. As you can see on that photo, the routing came out, other than that, pretty neatly. But because I hadn't thought about that Forstner bit projecting, the centre spike projecting a little more, there are a few little bits there where the centre spike from that Forstner bit actually kind of, you know, bit a little deeper than I wanted to go for my, you know, general routing of that cavity. Interesting there as well to see the kind of wood and resin top from the underside, because obviously with that being 10mm thick, I went to I think I left it at about 7 or 8mm at this point, you know, depth between the inside of the control cavity and the face of the guitar. With that done, I also needed to think about how I was going to mount everything. A couple of things changed after I started this process. So this was actually just giving you some idea of how I started going about thinking about how I wanted to arrange things. I wanted volume and tone for each pickup with a three-way switch, so I knew I actually needed to fit those in. There's a kind of connector block that a lot of the EMG pickups use, which is in the center lower there. These are active pickups, so they were going to need a battery, so we've got the battery in there. And initially I was looking at using that barrel jack. In the end, I kind of changed my mind on that one. The bit on the bottom left, though, is interesting. I kind of, I really wanted a bit of growl in a guitar. So actually, before I'd switch over to picking up those EMG 707s, which I used in this, I picked up a control which actually allows you to add some boost and distortion to your signal, you know, as that's going out to your jack. I'm definitely going to use that in another project because I'm really interested to see how that worked, but I really didn't need it. When I started testing how things sounded with those pickups, it just would have been quite unnecessary in this project. That process of thinking how it all fits together, really useful though. As I say, I don't have photos of when I redid that later, having changed my mind about a couple of things, but we'll kind of come back to that. Here's that routed body with the neck in the neck pocket. We've got the pickup kind of pockets. As I said, actually having done a little bit of using wood filler, they weren't perfect, but actually I'd have been fine using those as were. And at that point, I didn't have a routed pocket near the bottom of that picture as I do now for that Warwick bridge, because I was looking at using a bridge that was more like a tunematic style bridge. As it was, I kind of found that the tunematic would sit too high naturally, and actually if that was sitting so high, there was no way I was going to be able to get a decent action on this without angling the neck pocket back in the way that Gibson guitars and Epiphone guitars do. Which I could have done, but to be honest, it wasn't really what I was going for with this. So switching to a different bridge made a lot of sense. This Warwick one as well, I really interested me. Again, it looked really, I liked the look of it. It had loads of adjustment. They do have massive amounts of adjustment. And the separate tail piece, I think, kind of really works for me in terms of the looks with this guitar of doing that. Here's a quick look at the back of this as well. So I'd routed for that pocket, which I talked about before. Looking at the oh, I hadn't really mentioned that obviously with a three-way switch it was going to need a separate control cavity for that as well, you know, with a hole drill between the two, but obviously that kind of is on there. The stripe down the back of this though, I kind of, just looking at it, that Superior's got a lovely rich kind of shimmer to it when you see that. But the back just kind of needed something else, so I routed, just shallowly routed this pocket into the back and used some more of the same resin and mica and poured that in, then sanded down, etc., to produce that stripe on the back. And I still like that, I have to say. I still think it makes the back look really nice. Then it was time to get on with surface finishing the body of the guitar. After the sort of success I'd had using True Oil in my first bass project, it was a, you know, kind of a really obvious choice to do the same with this one. Little different though, it's got thinner coatings on it. I think I used about a dozen layers on this one. I wanted it still to have a bit more of the texture of the wood kind of feeling through, and as I run my finger across this, it kind of, you can feel as it goes from wood onto the resin, which is very smooth, and then you can just feel some of the texture in the wood as you run across that, which is exactly what I was looking for. Interestingly though, whilst I think it brings out the wood beautifully, and it doesn't really get in the way with the resin, but it doesn't really kind of show the resin at its very best. I need to make another resin topped guitar at some point and actually just use a spray on polyurethane clear on top of it and actually see how that differs in terms of what that does for the wood and what that does for the resin. Not because I dislike this at all, I'm very happy with it, but just because I think it will bring out slightly different features, and I'm really interested to see the difference there in terms of my learning for future projects. Now, something that I did differently from that first project was in terms of insulating the control cavities. In the first one, I'd used copper tape to insulate all of the control cavities. On this one, I switched to using conductive paint, which worked. You know, it was easier to use and it did work, but it wasn't quite as satisfying. It's a bit dirty, it's a bit, you get bits of dust of it, of certainly the type that I used still around. I guess that's graphite probably, and just wasn't as satisfying overall. So I think if I'm in future projects, I'm probably going to go back to using copper to insulate the cavities, and even though you don't see it, there's something satisfying about knowing that it looks so good as well. Fairly obviously, with that done, we've then got that question coming back around actually how I'm going to mount everything in there, and that brings me back to that question of pickup rings. Here, if you have a look, I've got a couple of just black plastic kind of, you know, 7-string style humbucker surrounds on, which, as I thought, kind of just really played up just too much black plastic on top of this. Having thought about pickup rings and that really having lodged in my mind as something that I wanted to do, but not being happy with the kind of black plastic ones, I had to look obviously then at how I was going to make my own wooden resin ones. After routing the edges of this guitar, I had surprisingly little left of the maple that I'd made this body top out of. So actually, what I turned to was something that had come as a free gift with the maple, and that's pieces of this yew that had come with it. It again had really nice grain, interesting colours, that side of things. Here's another piece of that, one that I'd started marking up for where I wanted to cut it to fit. And actually I then cast in the yew and in the resin, again the same resin and mica that I'd used before, actually the pickup rings. Now, as you can see here, I cast it so that at the bottom of this, as I cast it, was the wood, which was going to be the top as I used it, so that actually what we're looking at here is the underneath of those, cast in some fairly random pieces of plastic that happened to be the right size that I used. Here's how they came out of that. And again, I think really interesting. I was kind of quite happy with that as something to work with. Then cutting out evenly these to fit as pickup rings obviously took quite a bit of effort, and they're not perfect. Again, I would probably do that slightly differently now, but there's something really nice and organic about the shaping of them, of the wood, of the mica, that I just really, really liked. So I was clearly going to be using those in the final build. I was a bit speculative when I was making these as to whether I was going to use them or literally just put the pickups in there. But they detract from, even with just these pickups, they're quite solid blocks of plastic in there. These pickup rings really kind of detract from, you know, that black plastic taking up as much of the surface of the guitar as they might have. Here we can see that being kind of, you know, just laying that in place. And as you can probably see, they're starting to think about where actually matches with the resin underneath it. It was after this that I'd put this together, put the neck pocket in, put the pickups in, and actually installed all of the wiring so I could start testing to see how the whole lot sounded. And that was the point at which I found that my original bridge wasn't going to work. Now, for another project that I've been thinking about, I'd ordered this Warwick bridge that I've actually used on this, and actually I thought that will fit this really, really well. Again, it's got a separate tailpiece, which the Tunematic style one did. But I did then need to route a third pickup kind of, well, it wasn't a pickup one, it's slightly narrower than that. Same width, but slightly narrower than that, sort of in terms of its profile. I needed to route another pocket for it to fit in though. So again, I got on and did that. Here, actually, I was just trying to find out what the weight of the final body was, but it's the first one that I've got that actually shows that I've got that bridge pickup wired in. Now, I didn't bother shielding that one because actually that was going to have no effect on the kind of signal path on this. If you're not used to active pickups, it might be a surprise to you that actually, unlike passive setups, you don't use a bridge ground on an active pickup set, so there was nothing that was going to kind of run into this particular pocket from anywhere. Yeah, so it was literally just that, you know, for the bridge to sit in. It was at that point though I could really see that it looked a bit odd with the two pickup rings and nothing around this one, so I ended up making a third pickup ring in that narrower spacing for this bridge. Because I didn't have any of that yew left, actually I used some maple, and I kind of stained it slightly to match, but it still isn't the best colour match to everything else that's going on here. If I ever do another one with this sort of arrangement, I'm going to think about that earlier in the process and make sure that I've got plenty spare to actually match everything on the guitar. On the subject of matching things on the guitar as well, the next thing that I was thinking about was thinking about the guitar knobs. And actually with both the standard knobs that go on the potentiometers and the one on the three-way switch, actually I made my own for these. This here on the guitar is actually the second set I did. The initial ones that I did were with maple, and actually against this hedge maple, which has you know, got all of the other figuring and colour in it, they just look too pale and a bit characterless. This is actually in zebra wood, zebrano, and actually it kind of matches really, really well. As you can see, resin topped again to match everything else on there. We've got a couple of pictures of them being made, and actually I think this picture particularly shows that having gone for that kind of zebra wood, just kind of how well that then sort of tones in with the figuring of the wood on the body of the guitar. The neck, I'd mentioned that I needed to do very little with it. There was a teeny bit of fret levelling needed doing, so actually I got on and did that fairly obviously, but really tiny amounts. You know, it was that, put the nut on there, and really just kind of it all fitted together really well. Looking at the back of the guitar again, obviously I also had to make the covers for that. I did both covers with magnets, but I have to say the first one, the circular one, I couldn't get to settle in as neatly as I did with the full control cavity mount. So I eventually shifted to just using, well, it's got magnets as well actually, but using two screws to hold that sort of firmly in place. But that control cavity with the little kind of cutaway there for you to get your finger in is really, really solid. That's about the third set of magnets I used though. It's about the second cover and the third set of magnets before I got ones that I was really confident had the right strength and were properly set in and what have you. So again, you know, kind of you have to muck around with these things until it all works. That sapele is really nice as well. I've got to say the back of the body I think looks really pretty. Here is it in the process of being put together. We've got the body sitting there with, you can see the pickups in, all of the wiring was in at that point, the knobs are on, the bridge is in, and actually it's got its first set of tuners on. These tuners were really nice and worked really well, but really heavy. So actually I then got a different set of tuners, which are the lighter weight Geico ones that I've got sitting on it now. And then it was string it all up. I think this is the first picture I've got actually with it fully strung up and as a bass. Interestingly, I'd used some spare strings that I've got off that I'd taken off of another project earlier to just test actually how the sound went and actually, you know, pick up height and those sorts of things. So this was the first time it was properly strung up. Yeah, and actually that really is it done, ready to go, and looking like it does here right on the bench in front of me. Very happy with this project. Again, it took quite a long time, but I was taking my time. I could have just used off the shelf knobs on it. I could have not used rings or what have you, or used made ones rather than these. I could have not kind of changed how I was going to do the jack socket and the internals and what have you. But taking the time over all of that, I learned a huge amount with, and I'm really, really happy with how that came out. The only negative I can find about this guitar is actually that, and I expected it from the beginning actually, that resin and wood actually is really quite heavy. I've got a picture here of the first time I weighed it. That's in kilos, so 4.3 kilos. That's what, £9 or something? For a short scale bass, it's quite heavy, so I'm not sure I'd want to take this on a kind of gig and be wearing that for 2 hours. But then that's not how I tend to play it anyway. I tend to play it kind of in shorter periods. And as I said before, it's probably my second most played bass. Yeah, it's a really good one, and I love the way it sounds. I think the next thing to do here is to actually just show some sound samples. I'm going to put another video out of me actually kind of playing a full song with it, but because I've talked about how the different pickups sound, I think it's worth doing something shorter and simpler, just showing how each of those and the combined between the two pickups sounds. So I'm going to film that next, put that on this, and then film the song, which I'll put out as a separate video. So I've just finished editing up the video and looking at everything that's gone previous to this, and just wanted to put in a little postscript really from myself. Looking at all of that, two things stood out to me very, very strongly, just watching back all of those different clips. One is I went into this with an impressive level of audacity, kind of trying so many different things. And two, linked to that, it's really interesting seeing how many things there I learned in the sense of I got it wrong the first time and needed to alter things, needed to work my way around things. You know, the whole process of actually learning requires you to actually try stuff out. I love that at the end of that, I've got something that I really love the look of and love playing. I've got to say, I'm quite really kind of excited now for doing another kind of wood and resin type guitar, knowing what I know now, and actually, you know, taking some of that learning and applying it to a new project. So yeah, expect something to come up soon. I hope you found that interesting or entertaining. I suspect if you haven't, you probably haven't made it this far through the video. And yeah, hope you're all doing well. See you soon. Bye.